Okay, this week, I'm starting to grade, so I apologize. I thought I uploaded last week, um, or 5 and 6. I thought 5 was up there, so I apologize. 5 and 6 is now up, and I started to read through our receptive language projects. And I have to tell you, I do grade these excruciatingly slow. So I'm trying to get them all done by this week. A couple things that I wanted you guys to remember, just a few minor things, just in general, some of the general trends. So receptive language. I think what a lot of people forget is kind of when you have receptive language difficulties, you almost automatically have expressive language difficulties. What the challenge becomes when you guys are working with clients is, what skill am I focusing on? Because both of them are probably likely going to need support. So if you're working on receptive language, you're also going to see expressive language deficits and like cueing. So a few people kind of were, I don't want to say getting confused, but you realize, oh, if we're working on this, they might need help on how to model a response. And so a couple people just kind of clarified. So sometimes when you are working on receptive language, you inadvertently also address expressive language too. But it's sometimes more about, likely they need both, so you're not hurting anybody. So for instance, perfect example, I just had a conversation with my clinical fellow. She was asking, hey, I'm doing this and I'm working with these 4 kids in a group, but this is the kid that only has this skill. And I mean, it's a general skill that we all can improve upon. I said, you know what? That might not be their target, but if they get some extra support in that there's nothing wrong with that. And they could be a good model for that kid. Now, granted, every session goes like that. No, I think that's what gets hairy when you're trying to do groups in a school-based setting. But I was saying, she didn't need to excuse the other kids that, you know, everyone can work on some social skills or how to do conversation, that kind of thing. So there's certain skills that it doesn't hurt anybody to work on, and no one ever got hurt by doing some language therapy. You know, I should knock on wood. I'm sure there's a first for everything, but I think a little bit, that's where it kind of got a little muddled for you guys, and I understand, and that's totally, completely normal. So expressive language this week, looking at some of our read and review. Let's look at, music takes a minute. Hold on. Let me reshare. Okay, so expressive vocabulary growth. So looking from a developmental component, this is kind of what we're looking at. So when I say a 2-year-old should be using 200 words, and really that's kind of, when I know, and this is where I know, when I say 50 words and a parent looks at me like I'm crazy, then I know likely, especially we're talking about someone who's 2 or almost 2, and you know, likely an evaluation is warranted, and B, likely they need some intervention. Not always, I'm not saying always, but for the most part, just the lack of words concerns us. Now, I'll also have people say, hey, they understand everything I say, they're just quiet. And that's okay, and some of that's personality, but if they clearly are not functionally using more than 50 words, even, and then especially if you feel like they understand a dramatically larger amount than that, then we need to work on, maybe expressive language needs to be targeted. Now, a couple things. What we see is a lot of times in expressive language, and I don't want to say only, these things don't happen in isolation. That's why I think sometimes it's hard, especially if you watch some other things on YouTube or some of our master clinician, it can be difficult to tease out. So expressively, so if we do see a big discrepancy from what they understand to what their output is, there's a big gap. And usually in standardized testing, every standardized test has a statistically significant kind of way they do that, but it's typically on average, not always, when we're looking at 20 to 25 point difference. So if you have 110 on receptive language and then like a 68 in expressive, okay, I'm concerned. So hopefully those two components kind of grow. Usually receptively is higher, and then expressive language continues to build. But definitely, so this is what I like this. It's a simple chart, really kind of gets you thinking, okay, if I have a 4-year-old that's not using an extensive level of vocabulary, we might need to target that. So a couple things to targeting vocabulary. Okay, and this really pertains to a school-based setting more than any other setting, but even in a clinic-based, I might target an area or a schema of vocabulary to use. So for instance, if I am doing school-based therapy services, and if I'm writing a vocabulary goal, which I never say never, I do on occasion, but it's very specified. So for instance, I worked on emotion words, things related to feelings, emotions. What was the other one I've done? Functional core words. That's another one. You guys will get a lot of that in augmentative. What is that, 242? Maybe another one I can't think off the top of my head. But usually every gen ed school educator is always targeting vocabulary. So I never worry that I have to, but sometimes I have to target functional, meaning they need some real basic words that they don't have, and we need to be focusing on that. Okay. And this might be a duplicate one. So what I like is a good summary. So building blocks necessary to develop expressive language. So let's review one more time. If you have poor receptive skills, you likely have fairly poor expressive skills. So the understanding of language needs to come really before the ability to verbalize and speak it. Attention and concentration, attention and focus, another big factor that can dramatically impact expressive language. And then pre-language skills. So here we go again, and this is super important when we work on people who might be on the spectrum, who might have significant developmental delays of some unknown origin. So gestures, facial expressions, imitation, joint attention, eye contact. So those components are the pre-language skills. And I don't know if you've ever worked with somebody with poor eye contact. And I don't mean eye contact in people on the spectrum. I mean, there's some different views on that, but I'm talking just in general. A person who has poor eye contact, there's not a specified reason, i.e. autism, for it. They're hard to communicate with. It is very difficult when someone doesn't look at you or have a semblance of looking at you. No one has to stare you in the eye in your face, but we really want to make sure that communication, that visual eyes on the speaker is important. Play skills, again, here we go with a lot of the push for recess, things like that. So many basic expressive language skills are built during play. So pragmatics, completely. Motivation, fine motor skills. So a lot of people ask, why fine motor skills? What does fine motor skills have to do with expressive language? So break it down into its basic steps. We've got gross motor, fine motor, speech is the finest motor. And this really more pertains to 214 and 210 than mine here, 212. But when a person has delays or gross motor issues, they also have fine motor issues. They likely, in speech is the finest motor, there's breakdowns in speech for whatever reason. If it's not speech sound production, it's likely some type of what I call language organization, language formulation. So definitely those are kind of precursor skills to develop good expressive language. So like I said, this right here, I mean, sums up a lot of grad school in one paragraph. I mean, granted, in the most simplistic form, but it's such good reminders. I was just talking with, our OT, And, you know, I said we were talking about a particular case and kind of challenging for us. And we were talking about how many motor issues and why we have concerns across the board for this particular student. So what other problems can occur when a child has difficulties with expressive language? So what we also see is these comorbid stuff. So behavior, receptive language, like I said, receptive language difficulties implies expressive language problems. Participation, completing academic tasks, social skills, writing, a lot of writing and literacy involved in our clients who have expressive language difficulties, because writing is really another form of expressive language. And fluency, planning, sequencing, executive functioning, sensory processing. So again, here we go with what are all the comorbid things that we see. So when I see expressive language difficulties, I'm looking at all of these other factors. Okay, and then what can be done? So treatment wise, especially for our young, and really even, and I would say below the age of 8, ideally early intervention 3 to, well, actually birth to 5. Play skills are one of the most important things. So again, this will be my soapbox. Sitting in front of an iPad, if they are playing for fun, I'm not saying there's not some good benefits to certain things and material and exposure on an iPad, but if they're only doing this, they're not developing some of these other skills. So definitely just crucial that kids have opportunities to play with others, play in a developmentally appropriate way. So other activities. So just some simple activities that definitely work on improving expressive language. Naming items together, choice making. So do you want, this or this? Looking at books. Like I said, when all else fails, when you guys are out in the field, a couple things. So when in doubt, 3 or 4 books will get you through the day of therapy. Books, good thing of bubbles are always good. You can do so many things, turn taking, pragmatics, sounds, lots of different things though, a couple books, bubbles, and then there's usually some other type of, one of my favorite toys that I'm not bored using, can get you through an entire few days of therapy with various goals and targets, especially for those future home-based therapists. So definitely, so these are just some things too. So if left untreated, so some things that I also want to tell parents when they're like, I don't know if I want, especially kind of that 3 to 5, like, oh, is this, some parents question, like, am I just being overzealous? Am I just being over concerned? Should I just let this go? What I can say is a little bit of treatment, sometimes I only recommend 3 months, see how it's going, 6 months, kind of reassess at that time. And especially in a clinic-based setting, I like giving parents some of those options. And then, work on some things, see if they improve, give the parents some coaching, and it's a positive outcome, not a negative outcome. But other things can happen. Difficulty forming friendships, completing higher level education, developing reading and writing skills. Definitely those are some things that are dramatically impacted by expressive language. Any questions? And sometimes I can't see the chat, so 1 second. So again, here we go. I just gave you a couple. Explain 4 items that might be helpful for you to have with you to target the expressive language skills. So again, and I kind of put children and adults. So really, when you look at readings, so when I'm thinking, when I did adult-based rehab, I definitely had a couple different target audiences that I knew were pretty good. So, I kind of had some things about what I call like funny, inferencing some of those more comedy stories. There was one, oh gosh, I want to call it Chicken Soup for the Soul. I don't think that's what it was, but it's something similar where it's like a simple story with kind of interesting details, kind of a, you know, a funny or feel good ending, something like that, and then reviewing some of those things. Sports, usually depending on your clientele, sports is usually a really good. An ESPN magazine was always handy. Other things too that I found that I liked were newspapers, just even navigating through a website that's common, like Yahoo, MSN, some of those things. And it's more about reading. Can they sequence? Can they look back on that? The other thing too is in like adult neuro rehab where I'm not having access to, you know, internet versus home health easily or functionally. I mean, I have access to internet, but it's not always functional. So a couple things we would talk about, hey, a lot of times cards are usually, I mean, people of all ages play cards. So cards was always usually an easy thing to keep with me, use in a pinch, that kind of stuff. So I like some different things. Those are my targets, but think about what do you like to do? And think about some of your different age groups you're around, from young to old. So a lot of times when I was a young clinician, and I think I'd always worked with kids, so working with adults was a little more intimidating for me. I was like, hey, what would I do with my grandma? How do I engage my grandma's friends that, you know, I see them only periodically, you know, once or every 2 years or so, and, you know, how do I engage with them? What do I do? What do I talk about? So sometimes just starting with what you know is helpful. And then a lot of times, especially if you're like in a skilled nursing facility or more of like a long-term rehab, so somewhere in between, they call it like acute and subacute, you know, they're only there for maybe 2 weeks or so. A lot of times they have things with them that are really easy to pop out, but you got to pay attention. Like I said, cards was always one. A good part of the older population I worked with all played cards, and how to get real up to beat on euchre, because I didn't play that in the Midwest and that's where I was. So most of them played euchre. So yeah, cards is always one. A newspaper, you know, those are harder and harder to find. Newspaper, those were my two go-tos. And then, you know, like I said, kids, usually 2 or 3 different books. Dr. Seuss is always really easy, familiar. Eric Carle is another one. And Bubbles were usually some go-tos that I had. So just think about it. What do you like to do? How do you engage with others? What's easy for you to maybe support interacting with somebody with? And a lot of people are like, do you always have to have a million amount of materials? And it's not so much about having a lot of materials, it's about having a lot of tools in your toolbox of what to use. So that's kind of what's hard when you first start out as an SLPA. So hopefully all of you are with a supervisor that has materials for you to pick from and kind of try out and use. So I've had, gosh, how many SLPAs have I had? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've had what, 7 or 8 total. And each one of them, it's like, oh, I gave that to so-and-so. Oh, she just kept that. Every now and then I'll think of something. I'm like, oh, I think she just kept it. Or she used it all the time. I rarely used it. I told her she can just take it with her to her other school or her, you know, keep it at home. I had several. I had like 4 or 5 home health SLPAs. And so to me, I always have materials, and I'm not a material hoarder where they just stay up on the shelf and they're not used. So I pray for you if you ever get one of those therapists. But truly what I do as a supervisor is kind of give you some ideas to help you develop that. And when you guys get to your practicum, really start interacting with the materials that you like. Not everybody works well with what I call papers and worksheets. I'm not saying papers and worksheets aren't valuable or useful, but I like more real life things, more hands-on, and maybe because I'm that kind of learner, I like to do a lot of, you know, in my high school, we do a lot of cooking, real functional use things that are life skills. That's probably my favorite. I know not a lot of therapists necessarily always enjoy that, but I like it because it's functional, it's easy. They will have to make themselves a sandwich. They will likely have to make themselves some soup, make their own waffle in the morning, that kind of stuff. So sometimes I like real functional things to work with people. So just think about this. This isn't really a right or wrong answer. What I'm looking for, have you put some thought into what do you envision using? And like I said, hopefully you all have good supervisors to start with that have items. You know, my one supervisor starting, she always had a bunch of crossword. You know, we did, it was adult rehab. So crossword, Sudoku, those kinds of things were always handy to work on thinking, that kind of stuff. So it's hard to come up with materials when you don't know what the goal that you're targeting, but you know, think of the item, how are you going to interact with it to work on getting them to talk. So the biggest thing is we want them to talk. We want them to respond. We want them to want to talk to you. So what's real fun was phones. I found one of my CFs, she worked at a rehab place on the side, and she always encouraged people to get their phones out, look at pictures. What do they take pictures of? Who's in the pictures? You need a visual reminder. Your camera on your phone is outstanding. So on the expressive language observation, Jack, there's some great things there in that master clinician. I hope you guys haven't watched that. They need to update and give us more choices. I think you might have watched Jack before in another one. And then there's a quiz. And then I already talked about the read and review summary. Anybody have any other questions? I want to exit. Okay, so one other real quick, and then I'll let you guys go tonight. The other thing from expressive language, a lot of people always think it's grammar and syntax. So somebody in one of their referred to correct grammar and syntax. That is a component that we work on in expressive language, but it's not the only thing. So a lot of times I work on, do we have a noun and a verb, you know, subject, predicate? Do we have an object? Do they understand maybe when I'm looking at expressive language, how to talk to somebody, not talk at somebody? When I say that, what I mean is a lot of our clients, young and old, they'll just be talking, but they're not directing it towards somebody. And sometimes they're going in their own little tangents that they're just verbalizing. And a lot of times we're really working on some of that purposeful directive language towards others. So it could be grammar and syntax. It could just be verb tense. It could just be pronouns. It could be a variety of things. A lot of times I've been working lately more with language formulation. I feel like, or excuse me, language formulation, expressive language and sentence formulation. So a lot of kids will say things, but it's not in a good order. It's kind of hard to follow. So I really like working on that successive words that make sense. So I've been doing more things like recording a response, especially retelling a story. I really like that narrative language piece. And I didn't bore you all with narrative language, gotten some feedback from other people about it. So narrative language, there's lots of research going on about it right now. It's such a good target to use in therapy, especially for expressive language, because it really kind of works on that retelling, sequencing, that summarizing of an event. So I like narrative language. The more I research and learn about it, the more I've been using it as a target for our expressive language, but it can get, like I said, a little old. But if you've ever talked to somebody and you can't follow the story, that definitely impacts communication. So any other questions? Okay, nursery rhymes and songs. Yes, depending on the target. So for instance, a lot of times we're working on phonemic awareness. We're working on just straight, can they repeat a song that they know? can they repeat a song that they know and say it in the correct order in which it was intended. So if you've ever heard a kid sing a song, it's kind of out of order or their own version. And definitely what we're looking at too, if we're just trying to get words. So a lot of times at first we're just trying to get words, whether it's repeated, memorized, whatever. Then we want them used more functionally and then independently use the words that they know. So the nice thing about Learn She Rhymes songs presents it in a different format and it kind of activates that multisensory component. So it helps start building their language. So yeah, it's definitely appropriate. It's definitely a target that we use. Is it the one we only do? No. Am I thrilled with preschool goals like that? No. But I think it targets a variety of things, specifically phonemic awareness and expressive language, and maybe some of that recall that with adults we call it word finding. But you can't have word finding difficulties for words you don't know. So it does build their vocabulary and help them understand what the words mean, especially with songs that you have visuals to. So what was the one? Oh gosh, that Bumblebee song. And it gets, some of the kids like to make it real gross. Smashing up my baby Bumblebee. Anyway, my boys are liking this song. They must sing it at preschool, but they have funny, like different verbs. So it's good. And I was telling him, what was it? He was like hugging, I don't know what it was, but I was asking him if he knew what that meant. He said, no, he's like, no. So I showed him what it meant. And he was like, oh, and then he initiated like the movement with it. Maybe it was hopping. Maybe it was hopping. But anyway, that's how they help build language and make associations. So definitely, yeah. And always, songs for all of us, I think, can bring back a memory. Or how many song lyrics, Eddie Van Halen died today. And I have a teacher I work with who's a big time fan, and oh my goodness, definitely a rough moment for that teacher. And just me, I'm not necessarily a huge fan. I mean, I like them, but not like the teacher I work with. But I've heard the songs she plays, and she'll sometimes have it on. And just knowing some of these songs, and I don't listen to them all the time, but as soon as she played a song, I could think of all the words right away, and then I could think of a certain time I heard it, what was going on, why does this song remind me of somebody else? So there's a lot of things that songs trigger for us. So it's definitely a memory recall, but yes, so it does serve good purposes, but it's never the end all be all. So thank you guys. I appreciate you joining me. I'm working hard to get those. I think everyone's anxious to get their grades back. So try to have those all done by Friday. And that's it.